is Susan Donohoe. I'm a watercolor artist and I paint under the name of Susan Jane. Welcome to my studio. I teach classes and workshops that are primarily focused on beginners and intermediates and those who are coming to watercolor from another media background and would like to learn the ins and outs of watercolor. Today, I'm going to be painting my entry from this summer's Creative Confinement competition. It's a simple painting that features 3 of the elements of art: values, line, in this case hard edges and soft edges, and texture. We'll do texture in 2 different ways. The elements of art are the visual tools that the artist uses to create a composition, so it's really handy to know what they are. I have already done the preliminary prep for this painting, a preparation process that I will address in another video on my YouTube channel. I call those steps the design phase, and having been a designer, I have to say it's kind of my favorite phase. In the design phase, the artist determines the composition, does the drawing, plans the values, selects the color palette, preps the substrate, in this case it's the watercolor paper, and applies any masking or special products that the project may need prior to painting. I mostly paint from my own photos. I try to compose the photo as I'm taking it. Sometimes that works and I can paint it as it is. Often though, I end up combining several elements from different photos that I've taken into my composition. In this instance, the 2 tortoises are merely cropped from the original photo, which I took at a wildlife safari park. I made a line drawing and then I designed my values, both manually and with an app on my iPad. I followed up with a color plan based on my determined values. So now, let's get started. Here is my color study. I have chosen my colors. I'm using a alizarin crimson, phthalo cyanine blue, burnt sienna, olive green, hooker's green, and sepia. As you can see, I've already masked it, and this is my drawing. I don't always tape everything down, but in this particular case, I did. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to turn this over, and with a mop brush, I am going to come up along the edges of these shells, and I'm going to put water in. Could color this a little bit for you so you can see it a little bit better. Like many of you, I don't like making mistakes very well. So what I did when I first started painting is I decided that if I put water down first, that I would minimize the possibility of those mistakes because, and normally I don't tint the water like I've done for you here, but I decided if I put the water in a place where I wasn't happy, I could easily sop it up. So I came to that conclusion and I started mingling my colors into the water. I'm going to switch brushes and get my darks in here. I've added a little sepia and now I'm adding my mixture. I want to get it right up to the lines of the tortoise shell. You see those colors mingling? I'm going to get some greens in here because after all, this is representing grass. So I'll drop my greens in, the hookers and the olive. Hookers and olive, I know those are not real common colors for a lot of people to use, but for me, hookers and green and olive green sort of make a sap green, and many other colors in between that are a variety of greens. Okay, now I've got a lot of water here. You can see I'm tilting the paper and it is running. I've made it very dark. And the reason that I've made it very dark is because I want dark values in this area. I'm not going to mingle it too much because I don't want them to become one color. By keeping the colors somewhat separate, you get a really nice glow. Now I want it to loosen up and flow. So I'm just going to give it a little encouragement here. Bring it back down and then bring it out. And I've got my towel here to sop up anything that will flow onto my board. Going to wipe the tape off. You always want to wipe the tape off and keep it pretty much dry, because if the tape is wet, it can bleed back into your painting and cause blossoms. Now, in this case, I'm actually going to try for blossoms, but I want them to be where I want them to be and not where they've decided to go. So we'll just move this a little bit. I love the paint when it flows like this. To me, that is just the best. It's so random wherever it wants to be. And it's kind of exciting. Okay, so I'm going to let that go for a minute. And we'll see where it goes and how it turns out. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to put in my darks. We're doing the background first today. Sometimes I do the background first, sometimes I do the object itself first. It's really whatever you feel like doing that day. Often I try to do the hardest part first, because then if I blow it on the hardest part, then I don't have to waste my time finishing it. I can always start over again, and that's always a good thing. Now, I've got some green that I'm going to tap in here. And that water remixture I put in just now was in place of just plain water and then mingling. I'm going to come up now. You see this edge right here? This is a solid edge, a hard edge. Over here, I'm going to come with water up to the paint, and it's going to make a soft edge because these colors are going to bleed out and fuse, sort of like fusion. You know, they're just going to come out here and not have a defined exact space. And when I go across the paper with the side of my brush like this, I'm also creating a texture. It's kind of fun. This is a pretty wet time in the painting. I don't want any hard edges, so I'm going to try to work kind of fast I don't want color over in here or value over in here. So I'm going to back paint into the more solid areas. Under here, I'm going to give this some color. These are cast shadows. I'm going to drop some green in. A little bit of the sepia. I'm going to come over here and with my brush, make a soft edge. You see how it flows out? It's really fun. You'll have to give that a try. Now this particular foot is not really visible. So I'm just going to give it a once over with the color. I don't want it to be quite that green. So I'm going to go back over it with the sepia. When you blot, you have to be careful if you're worried about getting the color on something else. Make sure that the paper that you're blotting with, whether it's Kleenex or tissue of any sort, paper towels, there we go, there's the word. Make sure that they are clean, otherwise you may end up spotting the object that you would rather it not get spotted with that color. I'm mixing up a little bit of a light gray color right now. I don't want this to be too green or too brown, or I just want it to be shadow color. And if you remember, the shells on these tortoises rather, are sort of a gray color, almost a charcoal color. Now, I don't want hard edges. I've got to keep that wet. I also want to keep in mind where the sun is coming from. The sun is coming from over in this direction. So the top of this shell and the side of this shell are in sunlight. And I want to make sure that it stays that way. This can bleed out into this water, but I don't want it to color this side so very much. And yet, if I paint even just water over here too far, it's going to eventually bleed in that direction because the water and the paint, the pigment fuses out through the space that is wet. And as long as you know that, you can control it, but got to make sure that you remember that it's going to bleed. Wherever you put water, it's going to go. I'm trying to get this up here as much as I can because I want this to bleed over, and it's not going quite fast enough for me, so I'm adding some water that is going to carry that pigment over in that direction more quickly. And if I go up this way and down, all right. Let's do the other side. Get this wet. Again, this is just shadowing, trying to get some contour shadows in here. Blotting is something I do often. It helps me to control the water. It helps me to control where things are going. I've heard some instructors say don't use water. I mean, not water, don't blot. And well, you know what? I guess that works for them. But for me, I'm going to blot. Now I'm going to take some of this sepia and I'm going to get into the dark of the underside of the shell. And while I'm doing this, hopefully the rest of it's going to be drying. I have a fan on in my studio. In Florida, fans are pretty necessary, even with air conditioning, but I also have it on because it helps my painting to dry faster. And that's either a good thing or a bad thing, just depends on how you paint and what makes you happy. Getting some paint off of my brush and getting it pigment into the area so that it's a little bit darker. I'm going to go around his head up here and right out into this darkness because his shell is actually two pieces, not just one. Go around his head, top of the head of the tortoise next to him. Get a little, I'm putting in the mixture, my dark mixture right now, just to add some interest in the color, not let it look so flat. You see how up here, how it's drying into blues and greens, and it's much more interesting that way. All right, let's get over on this guy's side. He has his neck stretched out so far. He was really intent on making this other guy move and come out to play. Adding the sepia now to that mixture. We'll let those colors mingle. I want to get a light wash on here. Because I want these to blend. We want to know where his neck starts and ends, but at the same time, I want it to come out of the darkness in a quiet way. I'm going around his eye right now. It was really interesting on this particular tortoise. Maybe he'd just been eating a lot that day, but his mouth in this area had a real greenish tint to it. So maybe he was eating a lot of grass and it stained him. I'm not really sure, but it was pretty cool. You notice how I'm painting that green into that brown? The two wet areas are going to mingle together and cause a soft edge. Here's his nose. Coming down around his eye. And then we'll go up into this area a little bit. I got over into this guy's eye. So if I just make that a little bit lighter, that'll be fine, because I'm going to make his face after this one dries a little. Yeah, I need to let that dry before I can go too much further. I just want to add some water here so that these edges don't get hard. And let those fuse out. All right, over here, I want to go right down the side of his leg because that is in shadow. With a little bouncing movement, I can get myself up and over those masking bumps. I can also come here and do his foot another time. Now I'm going to soften this edge with a little bit of water and a bit of a bouncing movement. And I think I'm going to add the burnt sienna maybe. And let those two colors mingle together. But I don't want a lot. All right, so now let's get on with this. I'm going to come back here, and you see this is still kind of wet. So these colors are going to blend into each other, bleed a little bit, but it's going to show you the thickness of his shell. All right, I'm going to take off my mask. Not my mask, which we all wear these days, but the mask, if it's dry enough. Maybe it might not be dry enough yet. So I think I am going to wait. The modeling of the face, this really needs to be dry before I can do too much in details. But the modeling of the face, or modeling, not mottling, but the modeling of the face, the details, putting that in, it really needs to be dry, more dry before that. I think I'm going to give a color of green here, right over the top of this. Okay, I should be able to take the masking off now. I'm using what's called a picker-upper. It is a rubber cement picker-upper. It's like the bottom of shoes from the 1970s. That crepe sole. And it just pulls the masking fluid that has dried on here right up. See the highlights from my grasses that I put in with it. You just pull it off the edges. You can throw that away, or you can save it and end up using that yourself instead of the rubber cement picker-upper. I personally like the rubber cement picker-upper better, but you can do it. Now I'm going to take my green and I'm going to try to make some grasses. I'm not going to be careful about following these lines that I've drawn with the mask, because they're just meant to be there for highlight. Just little captures of sun, perhaps. My green's getting all hard, all dried up from the fan. With the tip of your brush, you can make random strokes, and you know what? It shows well enough, reads well enough to be grass. Some of this dark in here. The side of the brush, it's always good to get a little texture in there. Okay. I think I'm going to add some circles over here of the purple that the alizarin crimson and the blue have made, just to get a little more life into this picture. come down this side with that as well. Just making this a little bit darker over here. Get my shadow and the contrast. Mostly it's the contrast that I'm looking for. Okay, I'm going to put in his eye. Over here, he's squinting. His nose. Let that bleed out a little bit. And then we'll get this guy's eye. And his mouth. So here we have it, the final painting, completed. But baby, there's COVID outside. And this guy's still bugging this one, wants him to come out and play. If you would like to see the paintings that I've created, you can find them on my website, www.susanjaneartist.com. On my webpage, you can also find my schedule, any upcoming events that I have planned, as well as seeing the paintings. You can also follow, find, like, subscribe, and watch me and my ever-growing list of videos at these internet locations. I have a Facebook page, an art page, I have an Instagram account, and I have a YouTube channel. But anyway, here's my painting. I hope you've enjoyed following along with me today, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.